I think everyone living or dead has at one point come into contact with some higher self. So yeah, I would suggest everyone to do drag. Hi, I'm Imran. I'm 22 years old. I am a fashion student by day, and by night I transform into a Nusantara princess known as Cik Teh Botol, sometimes during the day too, and I am a drag queen.
How did you start venturing into drag?
I was introduced to it through Drag Race. I have known about the art of drag before. I knew that there were like cross-dressers, but my perception of drag didn't fully mature until I watched Drag Race around, I'd say I was like 18 or so, right after high school. Through our love for Drag Race, I kind of discovered that this was something that I had in me, and that's how Cik Teh Botol was born about 3 years ago. Drag for me is an extension of my identity. So for some people that may manifest in different persona or different alter ego, but for me, I manifest that through drag. The friends that I have today were also people who I met while I was doing drag. They were there since day one, so I don't think it was a surprise to anyone. It's completely natural for all of us. Family, only a select few. I think my cousins only at this point. Culture plays a big role, and I think disrespecting culture also comes with a lot of shame, and that shame is something that I'm not ready to explore with my parents yet. That's why I think it's harder for me to talk about those things with them. I've dealt with an identity crisis almost all my life, but I feel drag has allowed me to liberate myself and allowed me to explore that I do not have to be, weighed down by societal perceptions and societal expectations. Going into drag completely changes the person that I am. Sometimes for good, sometimes for bad, but most times good. I think drag for me is my drag persona, is the most unfiltered and truest form that I can ever be. So when I'm in drag, it definitely gives me a huge, huge confidence boost. I do wear drag in public, but I'm very selective with when and where I do that. Of course, that you have to be smart too. I wouldn't be dressed up in drag in like Masjid Jami or in Pasar Seni. What are my thoughts on what people perceive me? I have no thoughts about that at all. I've completely disregarded whatever people think about me. I get my inspirations from literally everything. I'm a very perceptive person, and also I'm a very visual thinker. So it can manifest itself literally in, like, sometimes if I walk down the streets and I see a person, that can be a source of inspiration. Sometimes it's a scent, which brings me back to my past. And I like to relate a lot of my performances based off of my personal experiences. The process of going to drag happens both physically and mentally, and also emotionally for me. I would say the longest process is having to go into makeup and having to physically transform myself. Usually that would take anywhere from like an hour and a half to like 4 hours, depending on the level of technicality that my look calls for. However, like mentally it's a lot harder, because I think there's a lot at stake especially when I step out of my house in drag. Being on stage, like going into drag, is also a process. There's always that initial butterflies in your tummy that you feel, but as soon as you let the music and the stage take over you, it's so liberating. And if it wasn't for that, I would not be doing drag every other weekend. It's kind of like an addiction, but a good one, a healthy addiction. When I first came out, I came out to both my best friend and my cousin. And since then, it's always, it's only gotten a lot easier to come out. Before, I've always kind of seen it as something that I had to keep amongst chosen people. I would not be here today if it weren't for all the people who has kind of held my hand at times when I wasn't able to see the person in me. I am extremely privileged and lucky to have a support system, and that goes both for my private and also professional life. So I'm a student, and even in uni I can openly talk about my drag with my lecturers. In fact, I've got lecturers who've seen me perform before. I think I'm very lucky to say that although I have had struggles with self-acceptance, it was all purely internal. External factors, not necessarily. I mean, of course, I would every now and then go through, like casual homophobia, but it's never anything serious like bullying. I've never been physically harmed before. I've always had friends who I've been able to talk about these things with. Horror stories, I'm sure there's a lot which goes on within our community, some which are talked about and some which aren't. I think like just as important as it is to have queer spaces, it's very important to foster queer relationships, because I've met a lot of like members of the LGBT community, especially gay men who see themselves as apart from the community. They will acknowledge that they are gay, but they wouldn't acknowledge that they're part of the community. And it's sad to see that, because I can recognize that there's definitely a lot of layers of internalized homophobia for you to not feel like you need to have gay friends in order to be gay. Because having gay friends, just like any community, allows you to relate to people. When you can't relate to people, you will always feel like the outsider. You will always feel like the outcast. The hardest thing about being queer is thinking that you're alone. Especially my experience, for the longest time, I've always thought that I was the issue. It was something very internal that I had to change in order to be accepted in mainstream society. Events like Shagrilla and lip-sync battles allow our community to have a sense of community. Through the power of togetherness and the power of sharing our experiences, we are able to validate ourselves, able to give ourselves safety and also the security to be our true self. Shagrilla came to us as a surprise. I was approached by Johnny Vicious, who at that point had this crazy idea to host a really underground and dark themed drag party, which really hasn't been heard of yet in KL. Up until that day, we've only had like, blue boy drag queens and also your drag queens who perform for like corporate events, and they're very commercialized. Fucking love them. They're my huge inspirations, but we've never heard of like drag and techno under the same roof. So I think all our identities and our drag personas are pretty, how do you say, uncommercial. It's very weird and distorted. I mean, conceptual, there you go. We never had an outlet to do so, but when Johnny introduced that to us, I think it kind of all came full circle, and we finally were given the space to really explore this twisted side of ours. When I was 10, I was in an all-boys school, and I tried really hard to fit in with the other boys. I tried really hard to like play WWE on like the PSP, and looking back at it, toxic masculinity is just revolting. I would tell my 10-year-old self to just keep on dressing up, Do not try to assimilate with the other boys. Who cares if your friends wouldn't be able to relate to you, because that's who you truly are, and you will definitely find your actual friends. It may come a long time, but be patient, and eventually you'll overcome your shame. The greatest satisfaction I gain from doing drag is the liberation that I get both internally and for my community. Because I think anything you do in Malaysia is deemed as political. And I don't think that our problem necessarily is because it's a very Islamic country. In fact, like, our sodomy law was introduced by the British. I think, if anything, the biggest obstacle for Malaysians is the ingrained homophobia within our culture. Asian culture has always been accepting of different genders and different sexual orientations. It was only until the British introduced a lot of draconian laws that we, as a society, started to demonize sexual minorities. So I think for all Malaysians out there, in order for us to encourage love, we should really read back on our history, exhume all the stories that our ancestors left behind, and you will find yourself a very rainbow-colored society. And no matter what's to come, we are here for the long fight. I would much rather put myself in this position than to sit back silently and watch even more people suffer.